He could not hear his own heartbeat. For 31 years, the man had lived inside a prison with no walls. A world where his mother's voice, his father's laughter, the cry of a newborn child, none of it had ever reached him. And worse than the silence was the shame. Because in his village, silence was not seen as an illness. It was seen as a curse.
Bubble.
The region of Decapolis was not a place for the broken. 10 cities scattered across the hills east of the Sea of Galilee, built by Greek hands, filled with Roman influence, foreign gods, foreign tongues, and foreign judgment. To the people who lived there, physical perfection was sacred. A man's body was thought to reflect his soul. So when a child was born unable to hear, unable to speak, the whispers began before he could even understand what was being said about him. Touched by darkness, cursed from the womb, better if he had never opened his eyes. He grew up watching lips move and never understanding the words. He learned, very young, to read faces instead of voices. Fear, anger, pity, disgust. He became a master at surviving in a world that had already decided he didn't belong in it. By the time he was a man, he rarely left his home. The marketplace was a battlefield of mocking glances. Children imitated his attempts to speak, twisting their mouths into cruel mimicry, laughing at sounds he could not even hear himself make. His own family loved him, but love, in that world, often came wrapped in embarrassment. They protected him. They also, without meaning to, made him invisible. And then, one ordinary afternoon, everything changed. It began with a sound he could not hear, but a vibration he could feel. Footsteps, many of them, moving through the dusty road outside his home, growing louder, more urgent. He stepped to the doorway and saw something he had never seen before in his quiet corner of the world. A crowd. Dozens of people moving together, faces lit with something between hope and disbelief. He didn't know what they were saying. He only knew something was happening. His brother grabbed his arm. The grip was tight, trembling. His brother's eyes were wide, wet, desperate, and on his lips, formed slowly, deliberately, so his deaf brother could read them. "He is here, the healer from Galilee. They say he can fix anything." The man's chest tightened. He had heard those words before. Rumors, traveling merchants speaking of a man named Jesus, who healed lepers, who made the blind see, who some whispered could even raise the dead. He had dismissed it. Stories like that were for other people, not for men like him. But his brother's hand did not let go. "Come," his brother mouthed again, slower this time. "Please, just come." The walk to where the crowd gathered felt longer than any journey of his life. Every step, he felt eyes on him, felt the familiar heat of shame rising in his face. He wanted to turn back. Part of him, a deep, wounded part, whispered that this would be like every other time. Another disappointment. Another door closing. What if this Jesus looked at him the way everyone else did? What if he was touched and nothing happened? Could he survive that kind of hope, only to have it crushed again? And then he saw him, not surrounded by golden light, not standing on a platform above the crowd. Just a man. Dust on his robe. Calloused hands. Eyes that, even from a distance, seemed to look past the crowd of curious onlookers and directly into the soul of whoever stood before him. The brother pushed forward, pulling the deaf man through the press of bodies, calling out, though the deaf man could not hear the plea, "Please, my brother, he cannot hear, he cannot speak. Please, just lay your hands on him." Jesus turned, and for one suspended moment, time seemed to stop. The deaf man stood frozen. He could feel the weight of stares around him. Some curious, some pitying. The same stares he had endured his entire life. But Jesus' eyes held none of that. There was no pity in them, no judgment, no discomfort, only recognition. As if Jesus already knew this man, already knew every silent night, every cruel joke, every prayer whispered in desperation that no one, not even God, the man had begun to fear, was listening to. Then Jesus did something unexpected. He did not heal him there, in front of the crowd. He reached out gently and took the man by the hand, leading him away from the noise, away from the staring eyes, into a quiet space apart from the multitude. Think about what that means. For a man who had spent his entire life being stared at, judged, made a spectacle of his own suffering, Jesus gave him something he had never been given before: privacy, dignity, a moment that belonged only to the two of them. What happened next would be remembered for 2,000 years. Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. The man felt the touch, felt it the way he felt everything, through sensation rather than sound. Warm, steady, deliberate. Then Jesus spit and touched the man's tongue. To modern ears, this might sound strange, even uncomfortable, but in that world, in that culture, touch carried meaning. It was intimate, personal. It said, "I am not afraid of your condition. I am not disgusted by you. I am here, close to you, in the very places where your suffering lives." And then Jesus looked up, not at the man, up toward heaven, and he sighed. Pause on that moment. Of every detail recorded about this miracle, this is the one that should stop us in our tracks. Jesus, the Son of God, the one who could calm storms with a word, who could command the wind and the waves, sighed. A deep breath, a groan from somewhere within him. Some say it was an expression of the weight of sorrow he carried. Sorrow for a broken world, a world where bodies fail, where curses are placed on the innocent, where shame is heaped on the suffering by those who should have shown compassion instead. In that sigh was the ache of every lonely night this man had endured, every mocking laugh, every prayer that seemed to go unanswered. God in human form felt it, all of it. And then he spoke. One word, Effatha. Be opened. What happened in the next instant cannot be fully described, only imagined. Because for the first time in 31 years, the man heard something. Try for a moment to imagine it. Not gradually, not faintly, but suddenly, completely. The wind, the rustle of fabric, the murmur of distant voices, birdsong, the astonished gasp of his own brother, sounds upon sounds, crashing into a mind that had never processed sound before, a flood of sensation so overwhelming it must have been almost frightening in its intensity. And then, his own voice. For the first time, his tongue moved freely, and sound came out clearly, correctly, the way he had always wanted it to. What do you imagine he said first? Scripture doesn't record his exact words. But imagine that moment. a man who had never heard his own name spoken in a way he understood, suddenly hearing his brother say it, suddenly able to say it back. Tears, disbelief, maybe laughter, the kind that comes when joy is too big for the body to hold quietly. The crowd that witnessed this did not stay quiet for long, despite Jesus' instruction not to tell anyone, an instruction rooted in his desire to avoid being treated as a spectacle, a traveling miracle show, rather than the Messiah he truly was. The people could not contain themselves. They were overwhelmed beyond measure, and they said something remarkable, something that echoed an ancient prophecy from the book of Isaiah, written hundreds of years earlier, describing what the coming of God's chosen one would look like. He has done all things well. He makes even the deaf hear and the mute speak. Without realizing it, this crowd of ordinary people, fishermen, farmers, foreigners, had just declared in their astonishment that the ancient promises were being fulfilled before their eyes.
Yes.
So what does this story mean for us today? 2,000 years later, far from the hills of Decapolis. Maybe it means this: there are forms of deafness that have nothing to do with the ears. We can be deaf to hope, deaf to love, deaf to the quiet voice that tells us we are not what others have called us. Not cursed, not broken, not too far gone. There are forms of silence that have nothing to do with the tongue. The silence of shame, the silence of someone who has stopped praying because they believe no one is listening. The silence of a person who has convinced themselves their pain doesn't matter enough to speak about. And into that silence, and into that exact kind of silence, and Jesus still speaks the same word, Effatha, be opened. Not because the man earned it, not because he was perfect or worthy or had everything figured out, but because Jesus saw him, truly saw him, pulled him aside from the noise of the world, and met him in the place where his pain had lived the longest. If this story moves something in you, even just a little, take a moment and type Effatha in the comments below. Let it be a small declaration that whatever silence you've been carrying, whatever part of you feels unheard or unseen, you're choosing to believe it can be open too. And if stories like this speak to your heart, stories that bring the Bible to life, that make these ancient moments feel real and human and close, consider subscribing, because there are more stories waiting. Stories of courage, of doubt, of impossible faith, and of a God who steps into the silence of ordinary lives and speaks. Until next time, may your ears be open to hope, and may your voice be opened to share it.